Welcome to Victorian Rumble Room. I'm Robin Adair. With me, as always, John Jurisic. And John, this is a tough time. This is a tough time to be a Canadian when we have this crazy, yellow-headed, orange-faced idiot in the White House who's putting 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports. And it's really going to just destroy our economy if it keeps going, but it's doing a lot of damage in the States already. And we're going to hear a lot more about that coming up a little later in the show when we speak to David Schneider. But I see the stock market is dropping, a lot of ramifications. What do you make of it?
The world order since World War II has now gone. And we are staring into the abyss. Don't know what's going to happen, do we? Lots of issues, lots of reordering, lots of new friends with old enemies. Oh my gosh. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm going to do, what I'm going to do about it is start to look to the future. How do we get out of this? I cannot now focus on this guy anymore. I don't even know what he's going to say, what he's going to do, what historical bashing he's going to be involved with tomorrow. We as Canadians must look forward and solve our country's problems right away. And as bad as the treatment we're getting from the Americans,
and Donald Trump,
and Donald Trump particularly, imagine being a Ukrainian right now, or in Ukraine for that matter. Their President Zelensky goes to the White House trying to secure a deal with crazy people, and instead gets shouted at by the president and the vice president. Absolutely disgusting.
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
Feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have to play cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I feel terrible for Ukraine. It's an awful situation. Canada has stepped forward with countries from the EU to say, we will still support you. We will send arms. We will send peacekeepers if needed, because anybody who trusts Vladimir Putin is out of their cotton-picking minds. And as we move now to other things to talk about, and there's really nothing as big as what's going on with Trump in the White House, but we still in British Columbia have a budget. And of course, there's more spending, and there's questions about, will we ever get all these deficits and debt dealt with? And at the same time, our Premier David Eby is talking about, we're at war with the United States because we're standing against them on all these tariffs, and we're going to have tariffs here. And it's a maelstrom of issues, all entangled, and we're trying to sift through it and see some reasonable leadership in the wake of all these terrible decisions being made by Donald Trump. And we have, on top of it, all these interprovincial trade barriers taking place. All the provinces are saying, oh, we're going to lift our trade barriers. Oh, we've lifted 2/3 of them already. Well, why not all of them? What's the justification for having trade barriers in Canada? I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like us to do something more about creating jobs in Canada for Canadians, more hard hat jobs, especially in our resource sector.
Robin, I love you. Excellent. That's exactly what I want. Now, let's get things clear here. NDP, provincial NDP, you've been in power for 9 years. So don't give me that all of the problems are now Trumpian. Absolutely. This is going to impact our lives, our economy, but we didn't get to this bad position because he was in power. It was because you guys were in power. You bet we certainly hear a lot about the need for Canada's oil and gas And we particularly heard about this at an energy conference you and I attended last week in Victoria. And it was sponsored by ResourceWorks. I just loved it because it was about solutions. How do we get things going? How do we get jobs happening? How do we get people, hard hats on people? This was overseen by financial advisor David Schneider, and there was plenty of food for thought. So,
Those were sage words, John, and I really hope people like, well, maybe our new Prime Minister, Mr. Carney, is paying attention to stuff like this. Enough of all this. We've got to move towards a green economy. Let's move towards dealing with what we have to do right in front of us, which is getting our economy reorged and revitalized. We have to work with what we have. We have so much natural resource development opportunity. We have huge reserves that could go on for hundreds of years. And we have export markets all over the world who want our product. We've got to get that product to market. That's a very important thing. And this was discussed, of course, at the energy conference. And this guy that was sitting at my table, he gets up and he asks, I think, a pretty poignant question.
it would appear that we need political will. Canadians have to have political will, and these things could change. We need to extract resources, we need to produce them, and we need to sell them. That seems a relatively simple solution. Therefore, without asking who you're going to vote for, and without asking what affiliation you're with, is there political will? And Heather, you alluded to this in your last slide, and we've been discussing it at this table. Is there political will to make these changes?
I think there is political will to make statements about making changes.
And I think you'll hear from other major infrastructure owners and would-be builders and investors the same message. We've seen Canada become unreliable in terms of its permitting process with no end in sight. So I think investors are savvy enough to say, we're not playing that game again.
If Donald Trump wants to build Keystone XL, we'll have the most beautiful pipeline on our southern border, and the United States will pay for it. I'm sorry, Europe is calling for energy. We know that. Asia is calling for energy. And if they can't get it from us, they have to get it from Russia. They have to get it from the Middle East. And you know what? They have to get it from the United States. And you know that the United States is putting all sorts of strings attached onto their energy exports right now. And I think it's very good for our allies to have options.
Well, we've mentioned now a couple times, and he's been a regular guest, and that being conference organizer David Schneider. He's based in Victoria. He's also a board member of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And he, even though he's away and enjoying the benefits of his investment advisory business, he still has time to talk. Let's zoom him in. And now, joining us is that organizer of that extraordinarily great Victoria Energy Conference, the phenomenal investment advisor, David Schneider. David, the panel has suggested many things need to change rapidly if Canada is going to weather this storm of trade conflict with the U.S. Do you believe we have the leadership that can quickly make the changes we need?
I think we have the leadership. It's a little fragmented right now. I think there's different premiers on, they're kind of in unison. I see actually your friend Dan McTeague just an hour ago attacking Mr. Ford because, Ford says we're going to cut off energy supplies. And Mr. McTeague goes, oh, by the way, you know how much energy is being imported from the United States? Unfortunately, in Ottawa during this time, we don't know who our prime minister is until the weekend, right? So it is an unfortunate time. So we wish we did. And that's one of our short-term disadvantages, definitely in Canada.
So 25%, that sounds like it's going to really be a hardship if it is prolonged. How do you feel about that in terms of what we could expect immediately? And how soon do you think it would really be noticeably hurting us?
Well, it's, companies can't adjust that quickly. And I think there's a pretty good attitude throughout the business community in Bay Street. We're so intertwined with the U.S. government that business people from both sides of the border are going to be going to Trump saying this doesn't work. So I don't think there's a belief that this is going to happen long. So that's the good thing. But, you gentlemen saw Jerry Prodi, who was one of our speakers, our chair of the MacDonald Laurier Institute. Wonderful guy. He had all these sessions set up throughout the summer because Chambers really, it's okay, Jerry, we'll see you in June, we'll see you in July. Over the last 3-4 weeks, there's panic calls. Our institute wanted to get to different parts of Canada because they wanted to get some ideas for solutions, because it hits like certain parts of Ontario immediately, 80 to 90% of their business. But I think it's finding out that there's energy that goes to both sides. Trump's going to figure that out. Business leaders, Wall Street's going to be on Trump. There's going to be a lot of pressure that this can't continue. So unfortunately, it's going to maybe provide a short-term hit on the market. We saw it today. What a day on the market. But I think cooler heads will actually prevail.
Actually, Dave, I think hotter heads will prevail. And I think those Wall Street folks are going to go, excuse me, this wasn't supposed to the way it's happening. So I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Where do I park my money as as Trump? I should probably be respectful and at least calling him that. Organizes tariff fights with Europe, China, and of course us, Mexico. Where is a safe haven for investments these days? Maybe nowhere.
No, money market funds, guaranteed investments. When you have so much uncertainty, it makes our job almost impossible. You are guessing. You might as well go to Vegas and put all your money on red because you're guessing right now. One thing that we are seeing that is helping the consumer, that's helping people out there, is a slowing down on the economy on both sides of the border. The 5-year bond rate in in Canada's dropped from I think 380 to 260, if I have it right. The 10-year bond, which is the mortgage rate, kind of the standard on the U.S. side's gone from about 480 to 4. So interest-sensitive areas will benefit those that are not affected by tariffs. So that's why recently the telcos, the utilities, and some of the REIT sectors is a place to be, the quality ones, because that is a nice thing that's happening. Is things are slowing down and rates are coming down, which is going to help our very indebted nation, especially Canada and the consumers. But Craig, right now, when it is a guessing game, most of us in the industry we just have to sit back, see what happens. But I really do believe Wall Street, Bay Street, the business community, they're powerful. They see it right away, some of these decisions. And Ontario intertwined and Quebec with the eastern states is so immense. So we'll see what happens. And, by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, things might change.
It was interesting. Right? I read the New York Times, as I'm sure we all do on occasion, and there was a story talking about this fellow who's very entrenched with the business community, particularly the Wall Street community, and he was talking to a lot of big guns. And he said a surprisingly large number of them who hadn't previously been Republicans voted Republican the last time because they wanted to see change. They were tired of Biden. They felt that there was too much regulation, that business wasn't being able to thrive. They didn't like all the what they called woke aspects of government intruding on the way they did their business. And in those regards, they were initially pleased that Trump was getting there and bashing around and breaking down some of the barriers that they felt should be broken down. But you have to think, if the market really goes sideways, and it seems that there's unhappiness on the market, at least in the short term, Trump can't ignore that, can he? I mean, He really is beholden to those people because they're the ones that got him in office.
Yeah. When he has people like Bill Ackman and so forth in New York, reminding him of things he can do and can't do, it's going to happen quite quickly. But we don't like the magnitude and the number of changes in such a short period of time. We knew we were going to get headaches when he took over office, but we didn't expect it this much. But we didn't expect it so much for Canada. It is, in a gratifying way, it is making us think. It is making Canadians get together. It is making Canadians change strategies. One of the things that happened about 3 weeks ago, I think it was the gentleman from the Hudson Institute met some business leaders in Vancouver. And one thing that was going to be happening, he said, is all these political leaders right across Canada are going to use the Trump excuse to change their policies and get away with it with their voters. But, you can't do this. But because it's Trump, some of these changes, and for instance, what I learned during this conference that we had, talking to some big leaders in the energy patch that was helpful in the conference, there's definitely a change of attitude in Victoria with Mr. Dix and Mr. Eby with respect to natural gas and LNG development. That wouldn't have happened 2-3 months ago. It's happening that quickly. And Quebec went from a 50%, just a little less than 50% desire to have pipelines through their province. Now it's at 80. So
Yeah.
things in a good way change. So there are some positive things happening. And I think the other thing on the energy sector is all of a sudden stimulated talks between Alberta and BC to stimulate conversation and ways to get power from Alberta to BC. What a
Hallelujah.
concept.
Hallelujah. Okay. Staying on the Canadian political scene. It's been interesting watching Trump fire salvos at Canadian politicians. It's not
Right.
just Trudeau, it's
No.
Pierre Poilievre. And conservative detractors, folks that want to stir up the pot against the blue, have suggested Poilievre is tailor-made for Trump. Do you think this is more spin than reality?
I think a lot of it is spin. It drives me crazy what's going on, quite honestly. And Pierre has to be so careful what he says and can't say. You know, the media is basically on side with the Liberals. The Liberals have the brand and the protection with most of mainstream media. So it's a tough one for him. It's really tough, though, that we're going through this and we don't even have really a prime minister. It drives us crazy. But again, it's short-term thinking. I think a lot of this is short-term thinking. But I remind viewers that this is really not a trade war. This is a drug war, my Washington people say. And it's for 2 months I've been saying it and producing it. There is a real desire from J.D. Vance and Trump to deal with the fentanyl crisis on both sides of the border.
Don't believe
You
you,
don't need to
Dave.
think that's a
Don't believe you,
red
buddy.
herring, though. That's a red herring. Because the president is not allowed to arbitrarily do these things unless he can say there's a threat to national security.
Yeah.
So he's using that as it's a threat to national security. You know, it sounds like fentanyl is coming by in the train load. You know, and it's just and
Less
there
than
is a lot more
1%.
fentanyl coming up from Mexico, and you know that we're being inundated with all these terrible things in the border. All these immigrants are coming to the United States through Canada, when in fact we've seen evidence has been going the other direction.
Right.
But I think he's using these things, isn't he, as props so that he can ram through these things to make us really feel that we're powerless. Then he'll come in and say, "Oh, now I'll make a deal for you because you're feeling weak, and I'm going to give you a crap deal, but you'll accept it because you're afraid of the 25%."
Well, I'm just saying, this is out of Washington, and maybe you can have Brad West sometime, the mayor.
Oh, we're rumbling with you, Dave. Come on, baby.
Oh,
come on.
No, but bring in Brad West, who a lot of people thought he should have been the border czar picked. Talk to Sam Cooper. Bring Sam Cooper on. Explain what's really going on. But it's a major issue. That's one of the question marks we have in the market right now is the attack going after our Canadian banks in terms of money laundering. They've already gone after TD with a $3 billion fine. And banks are going to have to be a lot more careful. But that's also slowing down our real estate market. We have no inflow from China right now in the real estate market. It's really slowed down. So, but it is issues. I think the drug war issue is important. It's a big issue in Washington. And it's interesting just in the last few days, the difference of an attitude with the Mexican president versus, a prime minister that really isn't around right now. We'll see what happens, but it's unfortunate. We've had these issues before between the United States and Canada. I remind you when Laurier and Roosevelt were dealing with the Alaska border with BC, and all of a sudden Roosevelt's two people negotiated behind the scenes with the representative from the UK, and all of a sudden that's why we have that big panel handle up there in Alaska. We lost all that shoreline. And
Yeah, that just like happened last week, right?
well,
but-
that was over 100 years ago, and Laurier didn't talk. Laurier didn't talk to Roosevelt for about 2 years.
No.
So it's amazing how these spats happen, but we're so intertwined right now. It is so sad what's going on. And it's, who's going to affect? It's going to affect businesses. It's going to affect people. Businesses are having a hard enough time as it is. And the cost of goods is going to be tough enough as it is. So hopefully, by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, we have a change, but we'll see what happens.
But do you think there's time? Do you think, as a practical business person and somebody who's linked into so many business people, not just in Victoria, but I'm sure in many other parts of Canada as well. There's an interest. There was great interest at your conference about let's change things. Let's get these new markets going. If Germany wants our oil and gas, let's give it to them. Let's give it to Japan. But those things take time. And it was pointed out by Barry Penner, the former minister, that the government needs to make the avenues open for business to be able to take these risks. In other words, they're not going to try to build a pipeline across First Nations property unless the government has paved the way for it. And do you think we can actually make these changes in time to save Canada as an independent government and an independent country with its own economy?
Well, I think we can. Unfortunately, it's like when we had a debt situation that was so hard when Paul Martin was the finance minister, and then Paul had to make some really tough decisions, and he did turn it around. That was a really, dollar what? Robin went to 62 cents. So we were, our credit standing was going to go down to almost junk bond status. We turned around. Our resources are so amazing. But look we have the premiers together. We're going to we're going to have a new prime minister by the weekend. Maybe we'll have an election. Maybe we have discussion. But I hope we get back into Parliament as well. That's the one thing. During this entire time, we don't even have Parliament sitting. That's unfortunate to all the people out there. So, and I know you two that care so much about our legislative process.
Well, Dave, you're being actually reasonably optimistic. You're being very rational.
And
I, however, am not.
You're being diplomatic. We're not as diplomatic as you are, but
well, we try not. You can't get too emotional because I'll be honest with you. Those with TDS, and it's not they get so emotional they can't just stop. What's really going on? And I think the common sense side is the business communities really get involved, like the auto parts going back and forth, getting fixed. Like it just doesn't work with these kind of tariffs. And I think Trump's going to be getting the memo tonight.
That's good. Hey, what about this? Here's how I feel, Dave. I'm seeing now American hockey fans are booing the Canadian national anthem in Madison Square Gardens. Boom, boom, boom. I want the start of that hockey game like we had a couple weeks ago. However, here's the impact that's real. To your point, snowbirds, they're evaporating. Canadians owning properties in the States. They're living, they're selling. Tell us a little bit from a clearly calmer, more rational perspective, what's happening with the real estate scene in the States and how is that impacting everything up here and down there?
Well, it's noticeable. I think there was something in the paper today that traffic in the United States is down 20 or 25%. There was a news report from the Clipper and other things. Obviously, it's curtailed. Even before this happened, a number of Canadians were seeing the cost of their insurance and other costs going up so much in Florida that they were selling their properties. It was getting too expensive. So we're starting to see that. We have to be careful. We get a lot of Americans coming up here during the cruise season, and we want them to fill up our hotels. So how do you balance that up? So we'll talk to the people at Destination Victoria about that. But it's a balance.
Canadian dollar. That's how you do that.
Yeah. Well, look at it, 69 cents. But it's a tough one. But right now we're going through some short-term anger. I think it's fair to say people in sports. I'm a big sports person. I can't stand both sides of the border booing a national anthem. I'm sorry. That shouldn't be taking place. I hope cooler heads prevail. But this is a real emotional time, and Trump does that. He makes people emotional. And hopefully we get some leadership in Ottawa soon that can talk to him one-on-one. It's nice to see the premiers getting together as we see. And I think, though, what's nice is the general public. Look what you two always do. You're educating the public out there. People are realizing the importance that we have other consumers for our energy outside of the United States. Look at all those projects that were disallowed. They talk about the North Corridor up there, that is the Suez Canal of North America. The access to products is just unbelievable. And what's really nice is AltaGas, which is a big pick that I've had because of their Ridley Island propane facility. Also, they have another facility built up there by Prince Rupert. It's absolutely going gangbusters because, as I found out, everybody wants to go to BC and not through the Panama Canal. So we have huge opportunities in the export business. And I think you guys said before this, you're going to get Stuart Muir maybe on the call. He's a leader in Indigenous relations, working on energy projects, working with First Nations communities. It's amazing what can happen if you have the right leadership.
Great to have David Schneider here. You can be sure we'll have him back again and again because, well, every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, he says something terrible about Canada, and it has ramifications on our economy. So we'll be following this very closely, and we appreciate David Schneider's time. And there are such ramifications, as I mentioned, Donald Trump says stuff, ramifications. How about when Wayne Gretzky does things? Unexpected. Wayne Gretzky thinks, I guess, he can do almost anything, and he'll get applauded for it. He's used to that as the great one. And at the minute, he's kind of wearing it because he made a miscalculation. Wayne Gretzky was the honorary captain for Team Canada in the Four Nations Cup. As the game was getting underway, or just before it started, Wayne Gretzky comes out from the American bench, gives a thumbs up to the American team. He's not wearing any Canadian colors. And to the crowd, to the general public, it looked like he wasn't really boosting Canada very much. As it turns out, he was in the Canadian dressing room. He was shaking hands with all the players. He was being encouraged.
Go in front of the cameras, Wayne.
But you got to do it in front of the cameras. You got to get out there in front of the crowd. You got to say, I'm a proud Canadian. Donald Trump writes a letter in favor of him and of course reiterates that he wants Canada to become the 51st state. And his big defense of Wayne was that Wayne says he doesn't think Canada should be the 51st state. So, I mean, Wayne's in a terrible mess. I feel badly for the guy in a sense, because he's not getting good advice. If you're going to take on these kinds of jobs in the middle of a dispute like this, an international dispute, you got to put your thinking cap on, Wayne. And John, on that happy note, maybe again you could tell folks how they can follow the Rumble Room.
Well, let me give you an example, Wayne, of a proud Canadian showing affection and demonstrating to the world that we are not for sale. On a recent Saturday Night Live, Mike Myers, the great comedian, showed at the end of the show, he opens his shirt and says, Canada, we're not for sale. We're not the 51st state. Mike Myers, I love you. Wayne, you could maybe use a little bit of advice from Mike Myers and start to represent Canada as we have seen you in the past.
Stop wearing the MAGA hat. Don't wear the MAGA hat again.
Yeah, what's up with that? Come on. So, as I catch my breath from Clearly, another dramatic, emotional show. Whoa, boy, baby. Let's talk about how we can all watch all of our interviews. Facebook, X, YouTube. Okay, I won't clap. Maybe that's over the top. As well as a podcast listening, as well as Instagram, as well as TikTok, as well as thanking our sponsor, Kelly Darwin from West Shore Web Hosting. Y'all come and visit us. Share, like, comment. That's it for me. Lots of fist pumping today for Canada and fists up for Donald Trump. I'm John Jurisic.
Got to put our fists up when we deal with Donald Trump, John, and we need to rumble on.